We are back talking horse racing, the greatest gambling game in the world, and I'm Nick.
And I'm Emily.
Today we are going to do a preview of the Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge for 2026. And by doing that, we're going to look back at the only Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge we've seen previously, which was last year's in the 2025 version. It was a doozy.
It was. But before we kind of get into the breakdown, let's talk about what the Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge is, just kind of the specifics of it, and comparing last year to this year, sort of the expectations of it. So the Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge, it's $5,000 bankroll, or $5,000 entry, I should say.
Yep.
3,500 of that is your bankroll, where 1,500 goes to the prize pool. And this is this year's, which is the same amount as last year. It was still a $5,000 buy-in, $3,500 to bankroll, $1,500 to prize pool. We can see on the screen, maximum of 2 entries. You must wager all of that $3,500 at least 7 races, ending with the Kentucky Derby. That's the final race of the tournament. Must wager $250 in a race to count towards that minimum of those minimum 7 races. And as much as you want, you can reinvest. Daily double, there's a little bit more specifics I don't think is necessarily worth going into, but it just displays like what the prize pool is, the set from there, the cash prizes, the seats that are involved, KDBC seats, NHC, 1 BCBC, etc. So last year there was 173 players. Now we project, I think there's going to be more, and it's tough to say, but we're guessing around 225. I feel like that's a safe number. I think more would not surprise me.
No.
With the participation we've seen on Twin Spires, this just being the Kentucky Derby, right? People are getting involved. People are playing. Tournaments are, we talk about horse racing as the greatest game. Tournaments are the greatest game within the greatest game. So we will probably get, I think we'll have more this year, which could impact that final total. As you can see right now, there's 128. We know for sure. So that's almost, or I shouldn't say almost already, as there was 173 last year. But we want to look back at 2025. We'll look back at the leaderboard in there. And like you opened, that it really was a doozy. And it was a really interesting tournament. And the way that it was finished, now we weren't following it live to kind of go through the ins and outs and what happened early on. But where do you want to pick up? Do you want to start with Frank Mustari and kind of where?
Yep, I think you got to start with the king, Frank Mustari, who played this, perhaps the greatest tournament play I've seen. Maybe the Flightline BCBC, where Brad played it for, not Brad, when they played it for a full win bet on Flightline at 3. Drew played it for a full all-in push on Flightline to win. That may be the greatest, but
that's one that I think I've heard people say it was probably too much, right?
Yes, probably.
But, so then I don't know. I don't know if there's. This is pretty goated given the fact of where Frank was going into the last race, because we can see with Twin Spires has the best leaderboard, so we can look through everything, and you can see early on, starting in race 3, and remember, you have to play a minimum of 7 races at $250. Now, in terms of race 3, that was a $500 bet, so a little bit over the minimum, but you can see from race 3 as a minimum, from race 5 as a minimum, race 6 as a minimum, it's a double, race 7 and race 8, and race 11, so those are the first 6 races, 0 cashes. So what that does is it takes away from the bankroll. So now going into the Kentucky Derby, Frank has a bankroll of 1750, right?
1840. 1850.
You be the judge out there, audience. As far as 1,000 plus 400 plus 350, with that
1750.
Okay, thank you. All right, 1750. Going into that last race, this is why there's 2 of us, because we help each other, right? So where there's $1,700, which typically in tournaments, I mean, it's not an envious position to be in when you have that minimum bankroll. And for a lot of times, what it does is it puts you out of position to play what you want to play. Now, in this case, Frank still was able to play what he wanted to play, and it working out. But his plays and the way that he played it, now we had fairly logical results in terms of the Kentucky Derby, but everything is cold. He has an 18 over 8 sovereignty over journalism exacta for $1,010, and that coming back 24,300, and then played 2 trifectas for $185.
Yep.
Hit a $185 trifecta, and that coming back basically 43, a little under 43,000 overall. Yep. That total being 67, but that's taking that whole entire bankroll. Maybe you can theorize and say, if he had more bankroll, what would he have done? Would he have played it any different? I still think these bets would have been there regardless. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think what also makes this interesting is always in terms of the tournament, of what the context was of that tournament going into the Kentucky Derby, and the question that you have to ask, and where this is going to be relevant for 2026, is what it's going to take to win this tournament. And sometimes, in most cases, you kind of look at how the tournament's been played all day and where people are in that last race. But in the Kentucky Derby being the last race, it can completely flip the board. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So going into the Kentucky Derby, Jonathan Hertham was in first place. James nailed it. Was at 31,000 or thereabouts, because he ended up with 26,166, and he had played 5,500 in the Derby, so he was just over 31,000, and was leading. He bet only 5,500, which, with a number that he had, he played it right, where he was like, journalism's going to win. I'm going to take a huge jump up and I'll win this thing. Journalism did not win. Sovereignty, he didn't include in his exacta, and he dropped 10 spots.
Yeah. So what number would you say he was playing for with journalism, given a $5,000 bet, what he thought would win at that point?
Journalism went off at just over 3-1, if I'm not mistaken. I'll pull it up real quick. So yeah, 3.5 to 1 is what journalism went off to. So probably in the mid 40s, 50-ish, perhaps. Especially with the exacta that he played, with Burnham Square running second, who was 5.5 to 1. Yeah, so probably in the mid 40s, 50,000 probably tops.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the number he was shooting for based on those wagers. And again, he had more bankroll, so if he thought it was going to be higher, he certainly could have played for more, wasn't all in, but it looks at about 48,000. And I think that tends to be a theme that we'll see with some of the other players. So having that idea of what that ending number is going to be could be the difference maker in here, and noting that there's probably going to be some chaos.
Yeah. And I think that's where this tournament's going to be different than most others. I mean, the Breeders' Cup, you're going to see big numbers put up at the end because that's, a bigger tournament. This is a one-day tournament with a smaller bankroll, but you see all the green arrows of all these players jumping up because they got the trifecta or they got the exacta, and I think even in one case they hit the win bet. But the numbers are they jump so astronomically in this case, and like you said, it was a relatively chalky. It was third choice over second choice over fourth or fifth choice in the try. So definitely not a chaos derby like you've seen in the past.
Yeah, let's get a look at Jonathan Kinchen, because this is another player who you said he was in second at that point?
He was in second, yeah.
So he's at second at that point, and ends up playing some doubles into race 11 to race 12. And none of them were live, because he keyed around the 8, who we had just looked back and saw that the 8 cameo performance was 8 to 1. So those doubles were coming back. I wish I would have taken notes on this, but we were looking at what were those coming back at around
we
25,000.
Yeah, we were
Does that
guessing
sound right?
about there.
Yeah.
We figured it was maybe somewhere in that 80 to 1 range. So it was sort of, 35,000 probably would be our guess of what the double he was playing for.
Right. And so when those doubles were dead, right?
Yep,
After Spirit of St. Louis won race 11, Jonathan still had a sizable bankroll going into the Kentucky Derby. And I don't think his bets were wrong. He ended up playing four different win bets and playing for a number. This is something we've seen from many players, including Jonathan, as recently as a couple weeks ago, stacking those win wagers in a way where he has multiple outs, depending on who wins, to get to a number.
yep,
And I think what it really comes down to is like we saw with James is shooting for around that $4,800 mark, and
yep,
that looks to be right where Jonathan was as well.
yep,
Now, yeah, because he ends up petting the majority of the bankroll on journalism, and that could probably just have to do with the fact that journalism is a shorter price, so he has to naturally bet more, a little bit on the 12, a little bit on the 9, and 5,221 on the 18, which brings him up to 46. Now, keeping in mind 31,000 was leading at that point.
yep,
So that was probably a number that he felt was going to be good enough to win.
yep. And if not win, definitely be second, right? Like not lose his spot because if he's shooting
Correct.
for that number, he has to figure a lot of people behind him are shooting for that number. He had the edge by being ahead of him, but also what ends up happening and what I think is the key here is that everyone's shooting for that number, and so it may have been that everybody was shooting for a bigger number, or what I think is more realistic is that because it's the Derby, it paid more than people anticipated, and then all of a sudden these numbers just kind of jumped.
Right. And now, one of the things that you've mentioned in terms of, since we don't have past years, but when looking back at ExpressBet in the past and some that were kind of comparable, you notice a pattern of playing the trifecta in the Kentucky Derby and that hitting and winning. And certainly we saw that with Frank. I think that's the case for David Rink and Douglas Bredar as well, right?
Nope.
Hitting an
So yeah,
exacta.
hitting the exacta. So I think the way that a lot of players are playing it is the Derby is its own. In this situation, we were going through this before, and Spirit of St. Louis was a fairly logical winner. He was either the
Wait,
first or second choice in the race before for the double, and the
yeah.
double paying it ended up paying $27 or thereabouts to one, and nobody having it. And
We didn't pull up David Rink's play before, and my jaw is like on the floor because it's similar to Frank Mustari, where he hadn't
Yep,
hit anything all day. Going into race 11, he had $1,200 and he bet it all to win on Spirit of St. Louis and picked up 4,944 and ended up playing a or not cold exacta, but ended up playing an exacta box of 818 for that 944 and getting second.
yep,
That's incredible play as well. I think that really
yeah,
just comes down to
and
bankroll. I mean, that is
yep.
well done.
Yeah, and this is the beauty of this contest, and what I think a lot of people who play contests on a regular basis will say is the flukiness of this contest is if you hit the Derby, you're going to win. Obviously, David Rink hit the Derby and didn't win, but he should have won if it weren't for Frank doing Frank things. And so you see all these people making these big jumps up because the Derby is such a anomaly in the game where you would expect what we normally see happen is big doubles early and then one big bet at the end to kind of push them over the top. And in this situation, you didn't necessarily get big bets to push them over the top. You just got correct bets. And so looking at someone like Douglas Bredar, he played a double and he's the one who hit the double for $1,000. It paid 26,960, which gave him a huge bump in his bankroll. But he had to hit the trifecta twice.
Well, it gave him a huge bump in his bankroll, but it was also bankroll that wasn't accessible to him
Yep.
going into the Derby. So he had that $1,000 tied up. He knew he was going to get back 2690. Now, the leader at that point going into the Kentucky Derby had
Just over
31.
31. Yeah.
So even coming back that 20, almost 27, he was still going to have to play. And I don't know if you can scroll up a little bit because I can't quite see the numbers, but he might have been all in with the remainder of those wagers in order to just try to, and that's why playing the combinations of the certain tries that you see, but really keying around, you can kind of see what his opinion was in terms of keying journalism in third in some spots, keying sovereignty in third in some spots, using both of them in the first and second spot with some long shots underneath. So we talked about that in terms of going back to like some other races where if you have that kind of key horse that feels logical in the Derby, you can kind of tinker around and spread in some of the other spots, which is what Douglas Bredar did here.
Yeah. I mean, he hit the trifecta with 3-9-18 over 8 with not all, but close to all. He was able to spread quite a bit while then doing pretty much the same thing here where he had journalism sovereignty 8 with 18 with 8 with 18 with that same spread at the bottom. So keying journalism in first and second here while also keying him in first and second, or keying him in just in second here, gave him that he hit 2 trifectas that each paid 11,556 with his double that hit, pushing his total up to I think he was just over 50,000. And you figure when he hit that, he saw that the board was at 31 and figured that he had probably won.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And and he definitely did not have the bankroll, and he was in that Frank and David a situation where he was, he'd hit a few things early, but not a lot, and he just didn't have a whole lot of bankroll left. Like he hit the race 3, hit a win bet to give him, double his money, and then a couple of place bets, show bets. He was just trying to have enough bankroll to get into the Derby, and that's basically where he ended up, where he was able to play $5,000-6,000 in that Derby to hit something that got him there.
Yeah, and looking at the way that Douglas Bredar played versus compared to David and Frank is that just stacking the bankroll where he had a little bit less, and then when he had the double going, that's even less bankroll. So getting creative, but still getting creative in the right way. I should say less bankroll to play in race 12, just to clarify that. Yes.
And I think he had to, let me zoom back out here just a second, because I think he had to play that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he had to play the 11th race because he had to have 7 plays in total. So that was, well, not a minimum. It was basically a minimum where he tried to play it for enough to get him basically to the number he thought he had to get to. Not quite there, but close enough where he figured if he hit this double, now what he had left, he was going to be able to push him over the top. So another really good play with, very limited bankroll.
Yeah, and it's something where it could be a little bit of a teachable moment here, because had he have made a bigger double, right? If he had thought, oh, it's going to take, I'm going to get to 40 or even 50, right? And I'm going to take $2,000 in that double. He is completely locked in, and then maybe doesn't hit that try because look at the amount of combinations of tries that he played, right? Keying around those horses, but there's a number of them that didn't hit. So in order for the ones to hit, he also had to play the ones that didn't hit. So if you take away that bankroll in the double, if he has even $500 less dollars or $1,000 less dollars to play in race 12, that's going to impact how he plays race 12 as well. So it is a tricky spot playing that double in there to make sure that you're basically not putting yourself in a position where you're drawing dead or drawing yourself out of a winning position, by being able to play what you want to play in the Derby.
Absolutely. And like we saw with Frank and with David, if you have an opinion, you're just going to play the opinion. Douglas Bredar had a little bit extra bankroll, so he was able to play it in a different way. This, to me, while Frank and David win. This feels like the more logical way of someone actually hitting and winning, right? I mean, I'm not going to say Frank or David got lucky because they picked they got it right and they picked, two of the more logical ones. So it's not like they were, guessing or like shooting for a price, though they were clearly shooting for a price. They weren't saying, "Oh, I need a huge price, so I'm going to throw two long shots together and I'm going to hit something big." It was, "I need this number, so I'm going to play it for this amount." This is a more spready way of doing it. Um, Not logical, but the more likely way of catching those longer prices is the way that Douglas played it.
Yeah, and to kind of key off that is that's how a lot of people play generally or end up playing the Derby, because you have 20 horses, you have a lot of combinations in there. And so there's a lot of people, and we say that for the fact of going into 2026, that chaos element, because there could have been some within the way that he played. Now, he did kind of need journalism or sovereignty to run first, second, or third in order to do so. But if you're someone keys around a horse that is a fifth choice and sort of does the same thing and gets some chaos in those other spots, it's the same type of ticket structure, different type of number, if that makes sense, and then can get a little bit crazier. So I think that's a good preview. We are April 21st today, so there's still a few weeks out. We might do something else, but at least we got something out, and I feel good. Is there anything else you want to add about 2025 or leading up to 2026?
No. I think the big one for me, because I do have one entry and I'm going to be playing it, is last year got to 60,000, 67,000. I think that number is too big. It's not the number that I think you're going to need to get to. Based on the way that people played it going into the Derby, the number that a lot of players who were up towards the top were shooting for was 50. So I think 50,000 is kind of the number to go for. And if you can get there beforehand, you're probably going to be in big trouble because people are going to then definitely be shooting to beat you. Whereas if you get to that 30,000, I think you're going to kind of set up a scenario where you get to 50 and they have to come catch you. And maybe people are going to play to get to 60 or 70. I think 50 is still kind of the place to land if you're, prior to the race starting.
I would say, again, just kind of early thoughts and building off what you're saying right now, is I think that's probably a good idea. And I think you should also probably consider, maybe I need to give myself a little more wiggle room.
Yeah.
Maybe not cut it too close to the bone, but if it doesn't take overexpending myself or degrading my position, like you said, if you're that person on the top that has that number, it could be a very scary place to be. You better have a good opinion, because people are shooting for over you, and you're going to have to take some of your bankroll in order to hold position, right? You're going to have to be that horse on the lead who has an extra gear to hold off the closers. So you're going to have to do that. So give yourself, I think it's very good to have that number, like we've seen with the players. I think that's very sound, but then also be flexible, because you might need to be.
Yeah. And if, chaos happens early, the number may be less. And if it's all chalk, the number may be 100,000 going into the Derby. And then all of a sudden you got to get to 200,000. Now, I find that very hard to believe. However, you got to be flexible and know that, going into the day, have an idea, and then coming into the Derby, having a different idea, or, refining the idea to a more precise number.
Right. And the more players, the bigger the field, the more potential for something like that. And we'll see that early on as well. You start to see if a lot of the big players who typically try to play big early and bump up their bankroll, if a lot of those players go out early, that could really change things up as well. So it'll be interesting to follow along, but I'm glad we did this recap. I'm glad we got to look back at 2025, talk some tournament strategy, and get people excited for this year's Kentucky Derby Betting Challenge.
Yeah, it's a new major, and it's one of the fun ones, and it's definitely a different strategy than you will have in most other tournaments, which I think makes it even that more interesting.
Perfect. All right. I guess we'll end there, and we'll talk next couple days or so.
Okay.